half of Alaska's population is indigenous still. And there's this island called St. Lawrence Island, and you actually can see Russia from their doorstep, as you know, just like Sarah Palin loved to say. And she was, by the way, mind you, Sarah Palin was the governor of Alaska. So this is like how fucking backwards some of the components of this state are, because it has been basically taken over by conservative leadership. And because of that, a lot of it's been privatized. A lot of this natural wonder, majestic splendor of the things like the, 80,000 glaciers in Alaska, some of them are privatized now by just these families who basically just treat them like their own stomping grounds. But so we visited an indigenous woman who is a tribal member and an elder of a certain tribe on St. Lawrence Island, which basically was used during the Cold War and World War II as a staging ground for the US military to spy on Russia because of its proximity to Russia. And it was just used as a toxic dumping ground. Um, Tons of carcinogens that are forever chemicals. They're called forever chemicals because they literally do not go away. They've completely poisoned the entire landscape. The thing about this island is that it's not even designated by the EPA as a Superfund site, which there are 1,300 Superfund sites around the country, 900 of which are either hosting or previously hosted military needs. The other ones are mining and oil industry and all of that. And Superfund sites are considered so horrifically toxic that they are endangering human health and the environment right now. And that is why they are on the national priorities list to clean, like urgently clean. But there's so many thousands of more sites that the EPA, because it looks bad, right? And a governor needs to sign off if there's a Superfund site in the state. So of course people don't want this kind of black mark on their record. They don't want to reroute resources and funds to try to clean up these sites. Everything they can hide reality. And so even though there are 4 or 5 Superfund sites in Alaska, there are thousands of more military dump sites and toxic pollution sites that have been completely wiped away. And one of those is St. Lawrence Island, where, these indigenous people who live there are revered as the most resilient, powerful people in the world. They survive the harshest climate in the entire world, the Arctic. These people have been living there for like thousands of years. And this one woman, Vi, that we met, she just said, we used to live until we were 100 years old. We had this longevity that was all due to the food that we were eating. I mean, rich salmon that you're just pulling out of the ocean, blubber from whales and walruses and stuff like that. And she said basically ever since the military just dumped all of their garbage and carcinogens and just buried it, that was their solution to clean it up. They literally just buried it under like ice and dirt and left. And all of these people now are dying at 40, 50 years old, born with horrific birth defects, and the military is just denying it, right? And because they're expendable. They're expendable because they're indigenous and no one cares about them. And they live out in the middle of the Arctic. And so this woman telling us this story and just saying, all we can do now is pass on our language because we don't have any of the things that we can pass down to future generations in terms of how to sustain ourselves with these beautiful cultural rituals and how to live off the earth. She said none of that's possible anymore. The only thing that we can do to survive our culture is just teach our language and move out of this place because it's become so toxic and there's no accountability whatsoever. We met this other woman, Pam Miller, from an organization called Alaska Community Actions on Toxics, an incredible woman out there fighting the good fight, basically exposing all these military dump sites in a really huge military community. I mean, everywhere you go in Alaska, the military is revered. There's tons of people living there. There's so many war games off the coast of Alaska, which is a whole other crazy issue, but it's so untouchable, right? And this woman has been harassed, sent death threats. She was called unpatriotic from her congresswoman because she simply is trying to like hold hearings and lobby for accountability for these PFAS chemicals, these degreasing chemicals that are like carcinogenic that the military just dumps all over these communities in Alaska and no one talks about it. And it's just absolutely horrifying when you peel back the layers of what's really going on, because I think when a lot of people think about Alaska, they think of this pristine, untapped, untouched wilderness, and really it is increasingly toxic and polluted and just essentially just been used as a dump site. And it really impacts the indigenous people who are living there. And of course, the Arctic warms 3 times faster than the rest of the planet because of where it is. And so they're all feeling the brunt of climate change, and they're feeling it right now. So it's, oh yeah, and to the glacier, this is another incredible story. I partnered with Dar Jamail, who was one of the first embedded reporters in Iraq. He has some really crazy stories. I mean, he saw the most horrific effects of depleted uranium. He saw babies being born with just absolutely insane birth defects, to the extent where Al Jazeera and other news agencies couldn't even run photos of what he was recording in these orphanages and stuff like that, because these sites are just essentially built on DU dump sites, and DU never goes away. And because of his war reporting, and then he transitioned over to climate change and wrote an incredible book called The End of Ice, which was a life-changing book for me. He really goes through how bad the situation really is, because it's sanitized to us. And I of course I know climate change is happening. I couldn't leave my house for 3 months last year because of the fires, but to the extent of how much it's going to impact, from everything from the coral reefs, which 1/3 of all marine life sustains on, to what the glaciers melting really means. I mean, Dar really spells it out in his book, and I was totally honored to have him come on board and be our guide. He was a mountaineer for many years. He's lived on glaciers 6 months of his life. And so he took us to the Matanuska Glacier, to just document just one glacier of, the 80,000 that are melting very rapidly. There's a huge pool at the bottom that wasn't even there 20 years ago. The density is clearly receded so much. It's not just the lobe of the glacier that recedes, it's the actual, like, it shrinks, and, the density is just completely shrinks like 10 to 20 feet. And what was incredible about this glacier is that it's privatized. Like I said before, it's just owned by some random family who now charges like hundreds of dollars for a public tour. They charged us thousands of dollars to get on to film. And then they
Wow.
kicked us off, before we knew that we had to leave, because they wanted to just like trample around it and have like a wedding for their friend on the glacier. And it's just, I think it just really
Wow.
symbolizes like how disturbing this kind of privatization and takeover of public lands that has just exponentially increased, the more Republicans take control of these states and national parks, and like how detrimental that is to nature. And Dar was just totally beside himself. He was like, this is so fucked up. This is something that he spent months of his life on, and to see it now in the hands of just this random family that can kind of dictate whatever they want, I think just it just really spells out that this problem is just so, it's so far reaching, and it's going to be really hard to solve, because when you've just sold off the land, it'd be hard to protect that land.